Hello Internet, I'm Remote Leg, and welcome to the LifeStyles project, a study of A-Life. I made the sun a little cooler while making heat dissipate more slowly. Locations under the sun had more than 400 units of heat, which I'm calling over 400 degrees. So I cooled the sun and increased the sun's footprint from 40 to 50 in an effort to provide a soft glow to a wider area. Altitude now contributes slightly towards pressure, so that mountains have less atmosphere at the top. It just seemed the right thing to do. I've also added the map zoom form. I get it by clicking on a map location like before. I get the old locations form by shift-clicking on a map location. This works really well. Let's take a closer look at the map zoom form. It shows basic information like altitude and pressure for the location under the cursor when I click, plus its neighbours. But a bonus is that it takes its cue from the map control setting. This map is red and white because I was showing energy. But I change to a view of sand, then click, and now we see the colours indicating how much sand is at each location. If I change to a map of the visible surface, the zoom map does the same. I've also changed the hue of gradient colours. Remember that rainfall was green and evaporation was red? Well, now they both work exactly the same way. Ignore the colour bar on the left, it's left over from my earlier testing, but still works to show the gradient. This first colour range shows values from 0 to 100% of whatever the maximum is. It's a sliding scale modified by the rescale button. After the maximum value is reached, I show the overflow colour to indicate that I've hit the maximum all the way up to 400%. If a location exceeds 400% of the current maximum, an automatic rescale is triggered. I was forced to change the substances too. I just can't seem to create a steady state with a good mixture of gas, liquid and solids. I've now added separate boiling points and freezing points for everything. This says that water boils at 450 degrees and freezes at 2 degrees. Yes, the numbers are crazy, but this shows how desperate I was trying to keep a good mix of substance types. Flow heat is a measure of how much heat a substance will take with it when it flows to another location. Yet another way I was trying to disperse the heat. I really need to find a way of getting a world that is warmed throughout, rather than what I've got right now, a world that is blisteringly hot at the equator and freezing at the poles. I know our planet is similar, but this is too extreme. It took 5 days, but I think I'm onto something. Aren't you glad you didn't have to sit through that? I'm starting to achieve a steady state once the world settles down. This world is managing to keep liquids and gases present, and I've stopped everything condensing down to solids. Here we have a world after 12,000 cycles, and a steady state has been achieved. Here are the world physics as it now stands. Substances boil and freeze at more reasonable temperatures than before. When they do boil, they use more heat and they release more heat when they melt. And they also carry a little more heat with them when they flow to another location. All this is designed to get the heat moving around, and it seems to be working. Look at all this rain. Lovely. It's been very dry up until now, but I've managed to get the climate more temperate by doing 2 things. 1. Substances can now flow across the east-west walls, just like the sun. This means the world is now a cylinder rather than a square plane. And 2. I've added distinct boil and freeze rates for each substance. These work like the flow rate by putting a hard limit on how much of each substance can morph on each cycle. See how the heat is reasonably dispersed across the surface? I've also added a couple of mountains, including the right angle one in the south. We are now ready to increase the size of the world. I've increased the size from 300 pixels a side to 600. I was very lazy and just duplicated all my bedrock multiple times. I'll tweak it later to smooth out the edges. Performance has suffered a little, as I thought it would. I think we're reaching maximum capacity at 360,000 locations. Of course now we're having problems with too little gas and too much liquid. I split transmute energy into boil energy and freeze energy. I know that boiling and freezing should gain and lose the same amount of energy, but I'm the boss, so why not? I tried to get substances to regulate heat, so gases take a lot of energy to boil and release very little when they condense, vice versa for solids. When it's too hot, I hope the gases will bleed heat, and when it's too cold, I hope the solids will generate heat. But it's not working. I'm still getting runaway resources, boiling, freezing, until none are left. Here, the whole world is turned to foam. To better visualize what's going on, I added history tracking and used our old friend Excel to graph it. This graph shows quantities of substances on the vertical and time on the horizontal, so we can see how the worldwide quantities of the substances rise and fall over time. I used the same colours as the substances table, so it's easier to see what substances are winning the race for dominance. See the foam shoot up at the beginning and continue to grow as time passes. This is not good. Time to tweak the physics and try and stabilise things. I tried a lot of tweaking of boiling and freezing points. Lots of adjusting the amount of heat involved in morphing. I sped up the sun a little. I slowed down the sun a little. I messed with the sun's footprint. But finally something emerged that looked promising. So I let it run a bit longer. And longer. And it finally stabilized into this. Which brings us to this. The world is pretty stable. We have gases and liquids. The surface has a reasonable level of variety. And we have regular rainfall. And finally, I added the history button that allowed graphing of history from within the application. It works the same as Excel, but now the code is inside the project and I don't have to copy-paste the data to Excel each time just to see what it looks like. Remember I said we're going to add creatures? I didn't do it. I'm having a lot of trouble trying to stabilize the environment. Of course, once I add creatures, they'll use resources and destabilize it again. There's always something. After a lot of tweaking reality, this is as stable as I can get it. That's using these substance definitions. It'll have to do. No more messing around. Next time we create life, I promise.